A school bus driver finds a 7-year-old boy walking alone on a dark highway at midnight. When he tells who left him there, she immediately calls 911 and refuses to leave his side. The headlights of Bus 47 cut through the November darkness like twin searchlights, illuminating the cracked asphalt of Route 47 in harsh, white beams. Margaret O'Brien gripped the oversized steering wheel with calloused hands, her knuckles pale against the black rubber. The engine's steady rumble filled the empty vehicle, a sound that had become her only companion during these late-night drives home from the depot. 52 years old, and she was driving an empty school bus at midnight. The irony wasn't lost on her. Maggie's eyes traced the familiar landscape rolling past her windows. Dormant cornfields stretching into shadows, weathered farmhouses with their windows dark, the occasional deer crossing that kept her alert during these solitary journeys. Millbrook County had always been quiet, but at this hour, it felt like the edge of the world. She'd volunteered for the evening maintenance shift again. Third time this week. The other drivers thought she was crazy. Who wanted to stay late scrubbing gum off seats and checking tire pressure when you could be home watching television? But home meant silence. Home meant Grace's empty bedroom and the stack of unopened sympathy cards she still couldn't bear to read. The radio crackled with static, then settled into the low hum of a late-night talk show. Maggie reached over to adjust the volume, and that's when she saw him. A small figure moving along the shoulder of the road, barely visible in the darkness beyond her headlights. At first, she thought it might be a dog or a deer, something that would dart away when the bus approached. But as she drew closer, the figure became unmistakably human. A child, walking alone on a deserted highway at midnight. Maggie's foot moved instinctively to the brake pedal. The bus slowed with a mechanical wheeze, its air brakes hissing like a sleeping giant. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder, hazard lights flashing orange patterns across the empty road. Through the windshield, she could see him clearly now. A boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing dinosaur pajamas that seemed to glow pale blue in her headlights. He was barefoot, his small feet picking carefully over the rough asphalt. In his right hand, he clutched something white, a piece of paper that fluttered in the cold November wind. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. In 30 years of driving school buses, she'd never seen anything like this. Children didn't walk alone on highways. Not ever. Not at midnight in November when the temperature hovered just above freezing. She opened the bus door, the hydraulic system releasing with a sharp hiss. The boy stopped walking and turned toward the sound, his face caught in the harsh glare of her headlights. Even from 20 feet away, Maggie could see the fear in his eyes, wide, dark, and filled with a terror that made her stomach clench. "Hey there, sweetheart," she called out, her voice carrying across the empty road. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he took a step backward, his bare feet slipping on the loose gravel, the paper in his hand. Maggie could see now it was a photograph, torn and crumpled, fluttered like a wounded bird. Maggie climbed down from the bus, her work boots crunching on the gravel. The November air bit at her face, sharp and cold. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and approached the boy slowly, the way she might approach a frightened animal. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, keeping her voice soft and steady. "My name is Maggie. I drive the school bus." The boy's eyes darted between her face and the bus behind her, as if trying to decide whether to run. Up close, Maggie could see he was shivering violently. His pajamas were thin cotton, meant for warm bedrooms, not midnight highways. His dark hair was tousled, and there were tear tracks on his cheeks. "What's your name, honey?" Maggie asked, crouching down to his eye level. The boy's lips moved, but no sound came out. He clutched the torn photograph tighter against his chest, and Maggie caught a glimpse of smiling faces. A family portrait, maybe, though she couldn't make out the details in the darkness. "Are you cold?" Maggie asked. It was a stupid question. Of course he was cold. The boy was practically vibrating with it. "I have a blanket in the bus. Would you like me to get it?" The boy nodded, a tiny movement that barely qualified as agreement. Maggie rose slowly, not wanting to startle him, and walked back to the bus. She kept her movements deliberate and calm, though her mind was racing. What was a child doing out here? Where were his parents? How long had he been walking? The emergency blanket was stored in the first aid kit behind the driver's seat. A thick, wool blanket that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Maggie grabbed it and returned to the boy, who hadn't moved from his spot on the shoulder. "Here," she said, wrapping the blanket around his small shoulders. "That's better." The boy's shivering eased slightly, though he still looked like he might bolt at any moment. Maggie sat down on the gravel beside him, ignoring the cold stones that pressed through her jeans. "Can you tell me your name?" she asked again. This time, the boy's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Tyler, Tyler," Maggie repeated, and she saw something relax in his face when she said his name. "That's a nice name. Tyler, can you tell me what you're doing out here?" Tyler's grip on the photograph tightened. When he spoke, his voice was small and hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "My daddy brought me here," he said. "He said someone better would find me." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. She felt her breath catch in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Someone better would find me. What kind of parent left a 7-year-old child on a deserted highway? "Your daddy left you here?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Tyler nodded, and fresh tears started rolling down his cheeks. "He said I was free now. He said someone better would find me and take care of me." Maggie's hands shook as she reached for her cell phone. The screen's blue glow seemed obscenely bright in the darkness. She dialed 911, her fingers clumsy on the keypad. 911, what's your emergency? "I'm on Route 47, about 10 miles south of Millbrook," Maggie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I found a 7-year-old boy walking alone on the highway. He says his father left him here. Is the child injured?" Maggie looked at Tyler, who was watching her with those wide, frightened eyes. "No, but he's cold and scared. He's been walking for, I don't know how long. We're sending a unit to your location. Can you keep the child warm and safe until we arrive?" "Yes," Maggie said. "We'll be here." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Tyler was still staring at her, the torn photograph pressed against his chest like a talisman. "Tyler," she said gently, "I called some people to come help us. Police officers and maybe some other people who know how to take care of children. They're going to make sure you're safe." "Are you going to leave me too?" Tyler asked, and the question nearly broke Maggie's heart. "No, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to touch his shoulder through the blanket. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay right here with you until help comes." Tyler leaned slightly into her touch, and Maggie felt something shift inside her chest. A warmth she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Not since Grace. "Can I see your picture?" she asked, nodding toward the photograph in his hands. Tyler hesitated, then slowly uncurled his fingers. The photograph was indeed a family portrait. A man, a woman, and Tyler himself all smiling at the camera. But the image was torn down the middle, separating the man from the woman and child. Tyler's father had been ripped away from the rest of the family, leaving a jagged white edge where his face should have been. "That's my mommy," Tyler said, pointing to the woman in the photograph. "And that's me. I was 6 then." "Where's your mommy now?" Maggie asked. Tyler's face crumpled. "I don't know. Daddy said she doesn't want me anymore. He said she has a new family now." Maggie pulled the blanket tighter around Tyler's shoulders and felt him lean against her side. In the distance, she could hear the faint wail of sirens approaching. Red and blue lights appeared on the horizon, growing brighter as they drew closer. "The police are here," she said softly. "They're going to help us figure out where your mommy is." Tyler looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her throat tighten. Trust. This frightened, abandoned child was choosing to trust her, a stranger who had found him walking alone in the dark. "Will you stay with me?" he asked. Maggie thought about her empty house, her solitary dinner, the silence that had become her constant companion. Then she looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and saw not just a lost child, but a chance at something she thought was gone forever. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I'll stay with you." The police car pulled up behind the bus, its lights casting wild shadows across the highway. 2 officers got out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Behind them, Maggie could see a second vehicle, a white sedan with county plates. "Ma'am." One of the officers approached them, his voice professional but kind. "I'm Officer Bradley. You're the one who called this in." "Yes," Maggie said, rising to her feet but keeping one hand on Tyler's shoulder. "This is Tyler. He says his father left him here." Officer Bradley crouched down to Tyler's level, his flashlight pointed away from the boy's face. "Hey there, Tyler. I'm Officer Bradley. Can you tell me what happened?" Tyler looked up at Maggie, seeking reassurance. She nodded encouragingly. "My daddy drove me here," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. "He said I had to get out of the car. He said someone better would find me." The officer's expression darkened, though he kept his voice gentle. "How long have you been walking, Tyler?" Tyler shrugged, a small movement under the blanket. "I don't know. A long time. My feet hurt." The woman from the white sedan approached, middle-aged, wearing a professional blazer despite the late hour. "I'm Janet Mills from Child Protective Services," she said to Maggie. "Thank you for staying with him." Maggie felt Tyler's grip tighten on her jacket. "He's scared," she said. "He's been through enough tonight." Janet nodded. "We'll need to take him to the station to get his statement and try to locate his parents. Would you be willing to come with us? He seems to have formed an attachment to you." Maggie looked down at Tyler, who was staring up at her with pleading eyes. In that moment, she made a decision that would change both their lives. "Of course," she said. "I'll go with him." As they helped Tyler into the back of the police car, Maggie caught sight of the torn photograph still clutched in his small hand. The image of a family, ripped apart and held together by a frightened child's desperate grip. She climbed into the car beside Tyler and felt his small hand slip into hers. Outside the window, her empty school bus sat abandoned on the shoulder, its hazard lights still flashing orange warnings into the November night. For the first time in 5 years, Maggie O'Brien was exactly where she needed to be. The Millbrook County Police Station hummed with fluorescent lighting and the low murmur of late-night activity. Detective Rosa Martinez sat across from Tyler in the children's interview room, a space designed to be less intimidating than the standard interrogation rooms. Soft chairs, muted colors, and a basket of toys in the corner that Tyler hadn't touched. Maggie remained close by Tyler's side, her presence the only thing preventing the boy from complete withdrawal. Every time someone new entered the room, Tyler would press closer to her, his small hand finding hers beneath the table. "Tyler," Detective Martinez said gently, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who had interviewed too many frightened children. "Can you tell me about tonight? Start from the beginning." Tyler's eyes darted to Maggie, seeking permission. She nodded encouragingly, though her own stomach churned with each detail that emerged. "Daddy picked me up from Mommy's apartment," Tyler began, his voice so quiet that Detective Martinez had to lean forward to hear him. "He was supposed to bring me back on Sunday, but he said we were going for a drive instead." "What time was this?" Martinez asked, making notes on her tablet. Tyler shrugged. "After dinner. It was dark outside. Daddy smelled funny." Maggie's jaw tightened. She knew that smell, alcohol. She'd encountered it enough times over the years, picking up children whose parents had been drinking. "Did your daddy say where you were going?" Martinez continued. "He said we were going somewhere special." He was crying. Tyler's own tears started fresh at the memory. "He kept saying bad words about Mommy. He said she was taking me away forever." The door opened, and Janet Mills from Child Protective Services entered with a steaming cup of hot chocolate. She set it down in front of Tyler, who wrapped his small hands around the mug but didn't drink. "Tyler," Janet said, settling into the chair beside Martinez. "We're trying to find your mommy. Can you tell us her full name?" "Diane Preston," Tyler said immediately. "She lives in the blue apartments on Elm Street, number 12. Martinez made another note. "And your daddy?" What's his full name? David Michael Preston. He lives in the house with the broken fence. Tyler's description was heartbreakingly precise. The kind of detail that spoke to a child who had been shuffled between two homes for months. Tyler, Maggie said softly, can you tell us what happened in the car? After your daddy picked you up. Tyler took a shaky breath. We drove for a really long time. Daddy kept drinking from a bottle and talking to himself. He said Mommy was poison. He said Robert was stealing his family. The boy's voice cracked on the name. He said if Mommy wanted to take me away, then maybe I should just be free. The adults in the room exchanged glances. Martinez leaned forward slightly. Who is Robert Tyler? Mommy's new friend. He has a big car and he always smells like soap. Daddy doesn't like him. Tyler finally took a sip of his hot chocolate, the warmth seeming to give him strength to continue. Daddy said Robert was going to take me to California where Daddy could never see me again. Janet Mills typed rapidly on her laptop. Tyler, when your daddy stopped the car tonight, what exactly did he say to you? Tyler's grip on the mug tightened, his knuckles white. He pulled over and told me to get out. I said I was scared, but he said I had to be brave. He said someone better than him would find me. Someone who could take care of me the right way. Maggie felt her heart breaking all over again. She reached over and smoothed Tyler's hair, a gesture that seemed to calm him. He gave me this, Tyler continued, pulling the torn photograph from his pajama pocket. He ripped it first. He said he was setting me free from all the poison. Martinez examined the photograph. In the harsh station lighting, Maggie could see it more clearly now, a professional family portrait probably taken at one of those department store studios. Tyler looked younger, maybe 5, sitting between his parents. David Preston was a stocky man with tired eyes and a forced smile. Diane was pretty in a worn-down way, her arm around Tyler protectively. The tear down the middle was violent, jagged, separating David from his wife and son with deliberate cruelty. Then what happened? Martinez asked. Daddy drove away really fast. I tried to run after the car, but it was too dark to see. Tyler's voice became smaller. I started walking because I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe if I walked far enough, I'd find home. The door opened again, and Officer Bradley appeared. Detective, we have an update. Martinez stepped out for a moment, leaving Tyler with Maggie and Janet. The boy immediately moved closer to Maggie, climbing onto her lap like a much younger child. I'm scared, he whispered against her shoulder. I know, sweetheart, Maggie murmured, stroking his back. But you're safe now. We're going to find your mommy. Janet watched the interaction with professional interest. Tyler seems very attached to you, Miss O'Brien. Maggie nodded, surprised by the protectiveness she felt rising in her chest. He's been through something terrible. Children need stability. Have you ever worked with traumatized children before? The question hit Maggie unexpectedly. I drive school buses. I see children every day. But this... She looked down at Tyler, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by the night's events. This is different. Martinez returned with a grim expression. We found David Preston. He's at his apartment, unconscious drunk. Empty bottles everywhere. We've got units bringing him in now. What about the mother? Janet asked. Diane Preston reported Tyler missing 3 hours ago. She's on her way here. Martinez sat back down, her expression softening as she looked at the sleeping boy. Apparently, David was supposed to return Tyler yesterday evening. When he didn't show up, Diane assumed he was just being difficult about the custody arrangement. It wasn't until she couldn't reach him by phone that she got worried. Maggie felt Tyler stir in her arms. So she didn't abandon him? No. According to the responding officers, she was frantic, crying, blaming herself. Martinez's voice dropped lower. Apparently, there's been an ongoing custody battle. Diane filed for divorce 8 months ago and has been living with her boyfriend, Robert Mitchell. David's been fighting the custody arrangement, claiming parental alienation. And tonight, it seems, David found out that Diane and Robert are planning to move to California. Robert got a job offer with a tech company in San Francisco. Diane was going to petition the court for permission to relocate with Tyler. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of a family torn apart by anger, jealousy, and poor decisions. Maggie held Tyler closer, imagining the terror this small boy must have felt as his father's world collapsed around him. "What happens now?" she asked. Janet checked her watch. "When Diane arrives, we'll reunite them. Then we'll need to conduct a full investigation into the family situation. David will likely face charges for child abandonment and endangerment." Tyler stirred and lifted his head, blinking sleepily. "Is my mommy coming?" "Yes, sweetheart," Martinez said gently. "She'll be here soon." Tyler looked up at Maggie with worried eyes. "Will you stay until she gets here?" "Of course I will," Maggie promised, though something in her chest tightened at the thought of saying goodbye to this brave little boy. 20 minutes later, the station's front doors burst open, and a young woman rushed in, her face streaked with tears and her hair disheveled. Diane Preston was smaller than Maggie had expected, with dark hair like Tyler's and eyes red from crying. "Where is he?" she demanded of the desk sergeant. "Where's my son?" Tyler heard his mother's voice and sat up straighter. "Mommy!" Diane appeared in the doorway of the interview room, and Tyler slipped from Maggie's lap, running to his mother with the desperate relief of a child who had been lost and was finally found. "Tyler! Oh, my baby!" Diane sobbed, dropping to her knees and wrapping her son in her arms. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Tyler clung to his mother, but Maggie noticed he kept looking back at her over Diane's shoulder, as if making sure she was still there. "Mrs. Preston," Martinez said, "we need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight." Diane looked up, her face a mixture of relief and rage. "David took him. I knew something was wrong when he didn't bring Tyler back yesterday. David's been drinking more lately, especially since he found out about the California move." "You're planning to relocate?" "Robert got a job offer. It's a good opportunity for us, for our future." Diane's voice turned defensive. "I was going to file the proper paperwork with the court. I wasn't trying to kidnap my own son." "But David didn't see it that way," Martinez observed. "David doesn't see anything clearly anymore. He's been spiraling since I left him." Diane held Tyler tighter. "He threatened to take Tyler away before. He said if I tried to move to California, I'd never see Tyler again." Tyler pulled back from his mother's embrace and looked at her seriously. "Mommy, Daddy said you didn't want me anymore. He said you had a new family." Fresh tears spilled down Diane's cheeks. "That's not true, Tyler. That's never been true. You are my family. You're the most important thing in my whole world." "Then why did Daddy leave me on the road?" The question hung in the air, impossible to answer in any way that would make sense to a 7-year-old. How do you explain to a child that sometimes adults make terrible decisions when they're hurt and angry? How do you tell a boy that his father's love had become twisted into something dangerous? "Sometimes," Maggie said quietly, "grown-ups make very bad choices when they're scared and sad. That doesn't mean it's your fault, Tyler. None of this is your fault." Diane looked at Maggie with gratitude. "You're the one who found him?" "Yes, I drive a school bus. I was heading home from work when I saw him walking." "Thank you," Diane whispered. "Thank you for staying with him, for keeping him safe." Tyler looked between his mother and Maggie could see the confusion in his eyes. He had formed a bond with her in those terrifying hours, and now he was being asked to transition back to his normal life as if nothing had happened. "Mommy," Tyler said, "can Maggie come with us?" Diane's expression was complicated, grateful but also uncertain. "Tyler, Maggie has her own home to go to. She's been very kind, but I don't want her to leave," Tyler interrupted, his voice rising with anxiety. "She said she wouldn't leave me." Maggie felt the weight of the promise she'd made on the highway. She knelt down beside Tyler, taking his hands in hers. "Tyler, I'm not leaving you, not really. You're going home with your mommy now where you belong. But that doesn't mean I'm gone forever. Promise." Maggie looked at Diane, who nodded slightly. "I promise. We'll figure out a way to stay in touch. Okay? Janet Mills cleared her throat. Actually, there are some procedures we need to follow. Given the traumatic nature of tonight's events, Tyler will need counseling. And there will be court proceedings regarding David's actions. What does that mean? Diane asked. It means this case isn't closed yet. Tyler may need to testify about what happened tonight. And given his attachment to Miss O'Brien. Janet paused, choosing her words carefully. It might be beneficial for Tyler to maintain some contact with her during the transition period. Children who have experienced trauma often benefit from continuity with the people who help them feel safe. Maggie felt something shift in her chest, a flutter of hope mixed with uncertainty. After 5 years of isolation, the thought of staying connected to Tyler was both terrifying and wonderful. If that's okay with you, she said to Diane. Diane studied Maggie's face, perhaps seeing something there that convinced her. Tyler's been through enough changes. If you helped him feel safe tonight, she trailed off, then nodded. Yes, I think that would be good. Tyler's face brightened for the first time since she'd found him on the highway. Really? Really? Maggie confirmed, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was agreeing to. As the paperwork was completed and arrangements were made, Maggie found herself thinking about Grace. Her daughter had been Tyler's age when she died. 7 years old, full of life and questions and an endless capacity for love. Grace had been killed by a drunk driver on her way home from school, a senseless tragedy that had left Maggie hollow and broken. But sitting here with Tyler, watching him cling to both his mother and her, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. The chance to protect a child who needed protecting, to be present for someone who needed her to be strong. Tyler fell asleep again during the final paperwork, curled up on the small couch with his head on Maggie's shoulder and his hand in his mother's. Diane and Maggie sat in comfortable silence, two women bound together by their shared concern for this brave little boy. He's been having nightmares, Diane said quietly. Even before tonight, the divorce, the custody battles, David's drinking. It's been hard on him. Children are resilient, Maggie replied, though she knew from experience that some wounds take longer to heal than others. I hope so. I hope we can get through this. Maggie looked down at Tyler's peaceful face and made a silent promise. Not just to Tyler, but to herself. She would see this through. Whatever came next, whatever Tyler needed, she would be there. For the first time in 5 years, Margaret O'Brien had a reason to believe in tomorrow. Dawn was breaking over Millbrook County when Judge Patricia Henley's gavel came down in the emergency family court session. The sound echoed through the small courtroom where Tyler sat between Maggie and Diane, his small hand gripping the torn photograph that had become his security blanket. Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case, Judge Henley said, her voice carrying the authority of 30 years on the bench, and considering the child's expressed attachment to Miss O'Brien, I am granting temporary emergency guardianship for a period of 72 hours. Diane's face crumpled with a mixture of relief and disappointment. She had hoped to take Tyler home immediately, but the social workers had been clear. Tyler's severe anxiety and his refusal to separate from Maggie necessitated a more gradual transition. This is highly unusual, the judge continued, looking directly at Maggie. But the child's psychological welfare must be our primary concern. Miss O'Brien, are you prepared to care for Tyler during this transition period? Maggie's throat felt dry. 48 hours ago, her biggest concern had been avoiding the empty rooms of her farmhouse. Now she was being asked to become responsible for a traumatized 7-year-old boy whose world had been shattered by the adults meant to protect him. Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. This arrangement will include daily visits from Mrs. Preston and supervised therapeutic sessions with Dr. Amanda Wells, the county's child psychologist. Mr. Preston remains in custody pending formal charges. Tyler looked up at Maggie with huge, grateful eyes. I get to stay with you? For a few days, Maggie said gently, until you feel ready to go home with your mommy. An hour later, Maggie found herself driving Tyler through the countryside toward her farmhouse, a social worker's car following behind them. Tyler sat in the passenger seat, properly secured in a booster seat that Janet Mills had insisted upon, staring out at the rolling fields and scattered farmhouses. "Do you have any kids?" Tyler asked as they turned down the gravel driveway that led to Maggie's house. Maggie's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I had a daughter once. Her name was Grace. Where is she now?" The question was innocent, asked with the guileless curiosity of childhood, but it still hit Maggie like a physical blow. "She died when she was about your age, in a car accident." Tyler processed this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance children often showed toward difficult truths. "That's why you're sad." "Yes," Maggie admitted. "That's why I'm sad. My daddy is sad too. That's why he drinks the smelly stuff and says mean things about mommy." The farmhouse came into view, a two-story white structure with green shutters and a wraparound porch that Maggie's late husband had built by hand. She hadn't looked at it through a stranger's eyes in years, but now she saw it as Tyler might. The peeling paint on the porch railings, the overgrown garden that she'd stopped tending after Grace died, the general air of a place where time had stopped. "This is where you live?" Tyler asked as they parked. "This is home," Maggie confirmed, though the word felt strange on her tongue. How long had it been since this place had felt like anything more than a shelter? Inside, the house bore the hallmarks of someone who had been living alone for too long. Mail stacked on the kitchen counter, dishes in the sink, newspapers she'd never gotten around to reading. But it was Grace's room that would present the real challenge. Tyler explored the downstairs with cautious curiosity, while Maggie made him a sandwich. He examined the photographs on the mantelpiece, mostly pictures of Grace, and studied the bookshelf where children's books still sat gathering dust. "Can I see Grace's room?" he asked, his question cutting straight to the heart of Maggie's anxiety. Maggie set down the peanut butter jar and looked at Tyler. His expression was serious, understanding somehow that this was important. "Okay," she said, "but it might make me sad." They climbed the stairs together, Tyler's small hand in hers. At the end of the hallway, Maggie paused in front of a door that had remained closed for 5 years. The brass nameplate still read Grace in cheerful purple letters. She opened the door. The room was exactly as Grace had left it. Pink bedspread with unicorns, stuffed animals arranged on the window seat, art supplies scattered across the small desk. A half-finished puzzle of a rainbow sat on the floor where Grace had been working on it the morning she died. Tyler walked into the room slowly, taking in every detail with the careful attention children reserved for important moments. "She liked to draw," he observed, pointing to the art supplies. "Yes, she did. She was always making pictures for me to put on the refrigerator." Tyler picked up one of Grace's coloring books and flipped through the pages. "I like to draw too, especially when I'm scared." Something shifted in Maggie's chest. "What do you draw when you're scared?" "Sometimes I draw the scary things so they don't stay in my head. Sometimes I draw happy things so I can remember what they look like." Maggie knelt down beside Tyler, seeing Grace's room through his eyes. Not a shrine to grief, but a space that could breathe again. "Tyler," she said carefully, "would you like to sleep in here tonight? We could put some of Grace's things away and make it comfortable for you." Tyler looked at her with surprise. "But it's Grace's room. Grace doesn't need it anymore, and I think she would like knowing that another child who needed a safe place was using it." Together, they began the delicate process of transformation. Maggie packed away Grace's most personal belongings, the stuffed animals that had been her favorites, the diary with the tiny lock, the certificates from school. But she left the art supplies, the books, and the general sense of warmth that had always defined the space. Tyler helped by making the bed with fresh sheets, dinosaur-printed ones that Maggie had hurriedly purchased during a stop at the local department store. As they worked, Tyler began to open up about his life before the highway. "Mommy and Daddy used to fight a lot," he said, smoothing the dinosaur comforter. "Even before Mommy moved out, they would get really loud, and I would hide in my closet with my drawing pad." "That must have been scary," Maggie said, adjusting the pillows. "Sometimes Daddy would come to my room after and say he was sorry. He would cry and tell me he loved me. But then he would fight with Mommy again the next day." Maggie felt a familiar ache in her chest. Not just for Grace this time, but for Tyler and all the children caught in the crossfire of adult failures. "Tyler," she said, None of that fighting was your fault. You know that, right? Tyler shrugged, a gesture that seemed too old for his 7 years. Daddy said if I was a better boy, maybe Mommy wouldn't have left. The casual cruelty of the statement took Maggie's breath away. She sat down on the bed beside Tyler and turned him to face her. Tyler, listen to me very carefully. Your mommy didn't leave because of anything you did. Grown-ups sometimes have problems with each other that have nothing to do with their children. You are a good boy. A brave, smart, wonderful boy. Tyler's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. Promise. I promise. The afternoon brought Diane for her first official visit, along with Dr. Amanda Wells, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who specialized in childhood trauma. Tyler's reunion with his mother was emotional but complicated. He was happy to see her but reluctant to stray far from Maggie's side. This is completely normal, Dr. Wells explained to the adults while Tyler played with building blocks in the living room. Children who have experienced abandonment often develop hypervigilance about their caregivers. Tyler needs to learn that he can trust his mother to stay, and that Maggie isn't going to disappear. How long will that take? Diane asked, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Every child is different. Some adjust in days, others need weeks. The important thing is not to rush the process. They established a routine. Diane would visit twice daily, staying for longer periods each time. Dr. Wells would conduct therapy sessions with Tyler, focusing on helping him process the trauma of abandonment. And Maggie would provide the stability and security Tyler needed to begin healing. That evening, as Maggie helped Tyler brush his teeth, she found herself thinking about the strange turns life could take. A week ago, she had been driving empty buses and eating dinner alone, convinced that her purpose in the world had died with Grace. Now she was helping a 7-year-old boy navigate his bedtime routine, feeling useful in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. Maggie, Tyler said as she tucked him into Grace's bed. Can I draw you a picture tomorrow? I'd like that very much. I want to draw you finding me on the road. But I want to make it look like you're an angel. Maggie's throat tightened. Why an angel? Because that's what Daddy said would happen. He said if I was very good and very brave, an angel would find me and take care of me. Tyler's eyes were serious in the dim light from the bedside lamp. I think he was right. After Tyler fell asleep, Maggie sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the photographs on the refrigerator. Grace's artwork still covered most of the surface, finger paintings and crayon drawings and school projects that had once filled Maggie with pride. Tomorrow, she realized, Tyler's drawings would join them. The thought should have felt like a betrayal of Grace's memory. Instead, it felt like a continuation of something beautiful. The way children's art could transform a house into a home. The way love could multiply rather than diminish when shared. Outside, the November wind rustled through the bare trees, and Maggie thought about the strange mathematics of loss and love. She had lost Grace, and that loss would always be part of her. But Tyler's presence in her house, in Grace's room, in her life, didn't diminish that loss. Instead, it created something new, a different kind of family, born from tragedy but sustained by hope. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Diane calling to check on Tyler. He's asleep, Maggie reported. We had a good day. He helped me make dinner, and we set up Grace's old art supplies for him. Grace was your daughter? Yes, she died 5 years ago. There was a pause, and when Diane spoke again, her voice was soft with understanding. This must be hard for you too. It is, Maggie admitted, but it's also healing somehow. Tyler needs someone to take care of him right now, and I need someone to take care of. It works. Thank you, Diane said simply, for everything. I know this isn't what you planned when you found him on that road. Maggie looked around her kitchen, at Tyler's dinosaur backpack hanging on a chair, at the glass of milk he'd forgotten to finish, at the drawing he'd started of a school bus with angel wings. No, she said, it's not what I planned. But sometimes the best things aren't planned at all. That night, Maggie lay in her own bed listening to the sounds of another person in her house. Tyler's soft breathing from down the hall, the creak of bed springs when he turned over, the whispered word, Mommy, that he spoke in his sleep. For the first time in 5 years, Margaret O'Brien fell asleep to something other than silence. And when she woke in the morning to the sound of Tyler calling her name, she realized that somewhere in the space between finding him on the highway and tucking him into Grace's bed, she had started living again. The healing would take time for both of them. But healing, Maggie was beginning to understand, wasn't about forgetting the past or erasing the pain. It was about finding room in your heart for new love without diminishing the old, about discovering that broken people could help fix each other, and that sometimes the most profound gifts came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Tyler appeared in her doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching the torn photograph that had become his talisman. "Good morning, Maggie," he said, and his smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Good morning, sweetheart," she replied, and meant it in every possible way. 3 weeks into Tyler's stay at the farmhouse, Detective Rosa Martinez sat across from David Preston in the county jail's visitation room. The man who had abandoned his 7-year-old son on a dark highway bore little resemblance to the father in Tyler's torn photograph. His face was gaunt, his hands shook slightly, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. "Tell me about that night, David," Martinez said, her voice professional but not unkind. She had seen enough broken families to recognize the difference between evil and tragedy. David stared at his hands, which were cuffed to the table. "I don't remember all of it. I was drinking. I'd been drinking for hours." "What do you remember?" "Diane called me. She said she was taking Tyler to California with that bastard Robert." David's voice cracked on the name. "She said I could have supervised visits twice a month. Twice a month to see my own son." Martinez made notes, though she had heard this story before from Diane's perspective. "So you went to get Tyler?" "I went to talk to her, to make her understand. But she wouldn't listen. She said I was drunk, said I couldn't see Tyler like that." David's hands clenched into fists. "So I waited. I waited until she left for work, and then I went back. And Tyler was alone? With the babysitter, some teenage girl who didn't know any better. I told her there was a family emergency, that Diane had sent me to get him." The calculation behind the lie chilled Martinez. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision born of drunken rage. It had been planned, deliberate. "What happened then?" David's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down his face as he continued. "I drove around for hours. Tyler kept asking where we were going, and I didn't know what to tell him. I kept thinking about losing him, about some other man raising my son. When did you decide to leave him on the highway?" "I don't know. It wasn't a decision, not really. I pulled over to think, and I looked at Tyler in the back seat, and I realized." David's voice became a whisper. "I realized I was already losing him, had already lost him, and maybe he'd be better off without me." The confession was devastating in its honesty. Martinez had interviewed dozens of parents who had hurt their children, and most offered excuses, justifications, denials. David Preston's naked admission of failure was somehow worse than outright denial. "You told him someone better would find him?" "I told him he was free. Free from all the poison between his mother and me. I thought if someone found him, they'd take care of him better than I could." Martinez closed her notebook. The legal case was clear: child abandonment, endangerment, possibly kidnapping. But the human story was more complicated. A tragedy of addiction, mental illness, and a family system that had failed everyone involved. Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, Tyler was creating his masterpiece. He had been working on the drawing for days, using every colored pencil and marker in Grace's art box. The paper was large, poster-sized, and Tyler had covered every inch with careful detail. The center of the drawing showed Route 47 at night, dark and empty except for 2 figures. A small boy walking alone and a school bus with golden wings spreading from its sides. But Tyler's artistic vision extended beyond the immediate scene. In the sky above, he had drawn what he called the Watchers, ghostly figures that looked down protectively. And in the corner, he had drawn a house with warm yellow windows and a woman and boy holding hands in the doorway. "This is when you found me," Tyler explained to Dr. Wells during their session. pointing to the bus with wings. And these are the people who watch over children when they're scared. Dr. Wells studied the drawing with professional interest. In her 15 years of working with traumatized children, she had learned to read their artwork like a roadmap to their emotional state. Tyler's drawing was remarkably sophisticated for a 7-year-old, but more importantly, it showed signs of healing. "Tell me about the Watchers," she said. Tyler's face grew serious. "They're the people who died but still love us. Like Maggie's Grace. She was watching when Maggie found me." The statement sent chills down Dr. Wells' spine. She glanced at Maggie, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, and saw tears in the older woman's eyes. "How do you know about Grace?" Dr. Wells asked gently. "I can feel her in the house, in my room. She's not scary. She's happy that someone is using her things again." Tyler picked up a blue crayon and added details to the night sky. "Daddy said an angel would find me, but I think maybe Grace told Maggie where to look." Later, while Tyler napped, Dr. Wells spoke privately with Maggie and Diane about his progress. "He's processing the trauma remarkably well," she reported. "The stability you've provided, Maggie, has been crucial. But we need to start planning for his eventual transition back to Diane's primary care." Diane shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Over the past 3 weeks, she had watched her son blossom under Maggie's care in ways that were both wonderful and heartbreaking. Tyler laughed more, had fewer nightmares, and showed an artistic talent she had never seen before. But his attachment to Maggie seemed to grow stronger every day, while his connection to her felt increasingly strained. "He doesn't want to come home with me," Diane said quietly. "Yesterday, when I suggested he might want to sleep at my apartment, he started crying." "That's normal," Dr. Wells assured her. "Tyler associates you with the chaos and conflict of his parents' relationship. Maggie represents safety and stability, but that doesn't mean he loves you any less." "Then how do we fix it?" Maggie spoke up. "Maybe we don't have to choose. Maybe there's a way for Tyler to have both stability and his mother." Both women looked at her questioningly. "I've been thinking," Maggie continued. "My house is too big for one person. It's been too big for 5 years. And Tyler is thriving here. What if?" She paused, gathering courage for what she was about to suggest. "What if you moved in here, Diane? Both of you. At least temporarily." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Diane's face showed a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "You would do that?" she asked. "Tyler needs his mother, but he also needs the stability he's found here. And honestly," Maggie's voice softened, "I need both of you too. This house has been too quiet for too long." Dr. Wells nodded approvingly. Blended family arrangements can be very effective in situations like this. Tyler would have continuity of care while rebuilding his primary relationship with his mother. That evening, they presented the idea to Tyler, who listened with the serious expression he wore when processing important information. "Mommy would live here too?" he asked. "If she wants to," Maggie said. "Would you like that?" Tyler thought for a moment, then nodded. "But can I keep Grace's art supplies?" "Of course." "And can Mommy have the room next to mine?" Diane felt her heart constrict. Her son was planning their living arrangement with the careful consideration of a child who had learned not to take anything for granted. "I'd like that very much," she said. The decision to create an unconventional family wasn't made lightly. There were legal considerations. Diane would need to formally share custody with Maggie, at least temporarily. There were practical concerns. 2 women who barely knew each other learning to co-parent a traumatized child. And there were emotional complexities that none of them fully understood yet. But there was also something that transcended all those complications. Tyler's laughter echoing through the farmhouse for the first time in years, the way he ran to greet both women when they came home, the peace that settled over all of them when they sat around the kitchen table for dinner. A week later, Diane moved her belongings into the room that had once been Maggie's sewing room. Tyler helped, carrying boxes and offering advice about where things should go. Watching him direct the arrangement of his mother's furniture with the same care he had shown for Grace's art supplies, Maggie realized that healing sometimes looked different than expected. Tyler's torn photograph still sat on his nightstand, but he had begun drawing new pictures, images of the three of them together, of the farmhouse with all its windows glowing warmly, of a family that didn't look like any family in the books but worked in all the ways that mattered. The investigation into David's case continued, but it had become secondary to the more important work of building something sustainable for Tyler's future. David would face consequences for his actions, but Tyler was learning that consequences didn't always mean endings. Sometimes they meant new beginnings, different kinds of families, and the discovery that love could multiply in unexpected ways. As Martinez completed her final report, she reflected on the strange mathematics of the case. A father's terrible decision had led to a child's rescue, which had led to the healing of a grieving woman, which had led to the creation of a family that defied conventional definition but provided exactly what everyone in it needed. Tyler's drawing of the winged bus hung in the kitchen now, next to Grace's old artwork and Diane's shopping lists. 3 generations of art on one refrigerator, telling the story of how broken things could be mended, how families could be chosen as well as born, and how sometimes the most profound healing happened not in spite of tragedy, but because of the connections tragedy made possible. Dr. Wells would later write in her notes that Tyler Preston represented one of the most successful trauma recoveries she had witnessed. But what she couldn't capture in clinical language was the way the farmhouse felt now. Full of voices and laughter, the sound of multiple lives intersecting and supporting each other, the sense that some endings were actually beginnings in disguise. In the evenings, when Tyler was asleep and the 2 women sat together planning their shared future, Maggie would sometimes think about the night she found him on Route 47. She had been driving an empty bus toward an empty house, convinced that her story was essentially over. Now, watching Diane read Tyler's latest story about angels and school buses and families that chose each other, Maggie understood that her story hadn't ended with Grace's death. It had simply been waiting for the next chapter to begin. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Tyler was helping Maggie feed the chickens behind the farmhouse. Detective Martinez's voice was tense when Maggie answered her cell phone, immediately setting off alarm bells. David Preston made bail yesterday evening, Martinez said without preamble. His lawyer argued that he had completed a court-ordered rehabilitation program and posed no flight risk. Maggie's grip tightened on the phone. She watched Tyler through the kitchen window, crouched down and talking seriously to the Rhode Island red hen that had become his favorite. 6 weeks of peace, 6 weeks of watching him bloom into the confident child he was meant to be, and now this. What does that mean for us? She asked. Legally, he still has a restraining order preventing him from contacting Tyler directly. But Maggie, Martinez paused. David's lawyer is pushing for immediate visitation rights. They're claiming that Tyler's placement with you is illegal, that Diane never had the authority to agree to shared custody. But the judge approved it as a temporary emergency measure. David's team is arguing that the emergency has passed, that Tyler should return to his mother's primary custody, and that David should have his parental rights restored. Maggie sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. Through the window, she could see Tyler showing Diane something he had found in the dirt, probably a colorful stone or an interesting bug. The simple domesticity of the moment stood in stark contrast to the legal storm gathering around them. When is the hearing? Maggie asked. Friday. 3 days. After ending the call, Maggie sat in her kitchen staring at Tyler's latest artwork on the refrigerator. Yesterday, he had drawn a picture of all 3 of them working in a garden together, their faces bright with smiles, the farmhouse standing solid and welcoming in the background. Now that peaceful future felt fragile, threatened by forces beyond their control. Diane came in through the back door, Tyler close behind her, both of them laughing about something. The laughter died when Diane saw Maggie's expression. What's wrong? She asked immediately. Maggie glanced at Tyler, who was washing his hands at the sink, humming one of the songs Maggie had taught him. We need to talk. Later, that evening, after Tyler had gone to bed, Maggie and Diane sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea growing cold between them while Maggie explained the situation. He can't take Tyler back, Diane said, her voice fierce with protective anger. Not after what he did. Not after Tyler has finally found stability. David's lawyer is arguing that the abandonment was a one-time mistake made during a mental health crisis. He's completed therapy, He's been sober for 2 months, and technically, he never relinquished his parental rights. Diane buried her face in her hands. This is my fault. I should have filed for sole custody months ago, when David's drinking got worse. I should have protected Tyler better. You did the best you could with an impossible situation, Maggie said firmly. And we're not giving up. Dr. Wells is preparing a report about Tyler's progress. We have Tyler's artwork documenting his trauma and recovery. We have proof that this arrangement is working. But will it be enough? Neither woman had an answer to that question. The next morning brought an unwelcome surprise. Maggie was helping Tyler with his reading practice when they heard a car pulling up the gravel driveway. Through the living room window, she saw a familiar figure getting out of a beat-up pickup truck. David Preston looked different than he had in the jail visitation room. He had gained weight, his face had some color back, and his clothes were clean and pressed. But his eyes still held that hollow, desperate quality that Maggie remembered from the night she had found Tyler on the highway. "Tyler, go to your room," Maggie said quietly. But Tyler had already seen his father through the window. The boy froze, his reading book falling from his hands to the floor. For a moment, he looked exactly like he had that night on Route 47, small, frightened, and utterly vulnerable. "Is that my daddy?" he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. Go upstairs to your room and stay there until I come get you. Okay?" Tyler nodded and ran for the stairs just as David approached the front door. Instead of knocking, he simply walked into the house as if he still had the right to be there. "Where is he?" David demanded. "Where's my son?" Maggie positioned herself between David and the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You have a restraining order, David. You're not supposed to be here. That's my boy upstairs, my son. And you've been filling his head with poison against me for 2 months. Tyler is safe here. He's happy. He's healing." David's laugh was bitter and hollow. Healing from what? From having a father who loves him. From being part of a real family. From being abandoned on a highway in the middle of the night. Maggie shot back, her own anger flaring. From watching his parents destroy each other. From being told he was poison. David's face darkened. "You don't know anything about my family, about what I've been through. Diane took everything from me. My house, my son, my reason for living. And now she's got you helping her finish the job." "David." Diane's voice came from the kitchen doorway. She had heard the commotion and come downstairs, and now she stood facing her ex-husband for the first time since the night he had taken Tyler. "You need to leave. I need to see my son. I've been clean for 2 months, Diane. 2 months. I've been going to meetings, seeing a therapist, following every rule they gave me. And for what? So Tyler can call some stranger his mother. Maggie isn't a stranger. She's the woman who saved Tyler when you left him to die." The accusation hung in the air between them, raw and unforgivable. David's face crumpled, and for a moment, Maggie saw not the angry man who had burst into her house, but the broken father who had made the worst decision of his life in a moment of complete despair. "I didn't mean for him to get hurt," David said, his voice cracking. I thought someone would find him right away. I thought he'd be better off." "But you didn't stay to make sure," Diane said. "You didn't call the police or social services or anyone who could help him safely. You just drove away and left him alone in the dark. I was sick. I was drunk and sick and I wasn't thinking clearly." "And what about next time?" Maggie asked. "What happens the next time you're sick and drunk and not thinking clearly? What happens to Tyler then?" David's desperation transformed back into anger. "There won't be a next time. I'm different now. I'm sober now." "You're sober today," Diane corrected. "But Tyler needs more than today. He needs to know that the people who love him will be there tomorrow and next week and next year." From upstairs came the sound of Tyler's bedroom door opening. All 3 adults turned toward the stairs as Tyler appeared at the top, clutching his torn family photograph in one hand and one of his drawings in the other. "Tyler, go back to your room," Diane said urgently. But Tyler didn't move. Instead, he started down the stairs slowly, his eyes fixed on his father. When he reached the bottom, he stood directly in front of David, small but somehow not afraid. "Hi, Daddy," he said quietly. David dropped to his knees, putting himself at Tyler's eye level. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out to touch his son's cheek. "Tyler, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I love you so much, and I'm never going to hurt you again." Tyler studied his father's face with the serious expression he wore when processing important information. Then he held up the drawing he had brought downstairs. It was a new picture, one Maggie hadn't seen before. It showed Route 47 at night, but this version was different from his earlier artwork. In this drawing, Tyler had depicted himself walking away from a car, away from a figure that was clearly David, toward a school bus with golden wings. But most significantly, Tyler had drawn himself with wings too, as if he had learned to fly. "This is what happened that night," Tyler said, showing the drawing to his father. "You left me, but I found Maggie, and Maggie found me, and now I'm not scared anymore." David stared at the drawing, his face cycling through emotions too complex for words. "Tyler, I want you to come home with me. We can be a family again." Tyler shook his head. "I am home, Daddy. This is my home now, with Maggie and Mommy. But I'm your father. I'm supposed to take care of you." Tyler's response was delivered with the devastating honesty that only children possessed. "You didn't take care of me that night. You left me alone. But Maggie didn't leave me alone." The words hit David like physical blows. He looked around the farmhouse, at Tyler's artwork covering the refrigerator, at the comfortable furniture that showed signs of a lived-in home, at the chicken feathers on Tyler's sneakers and the contentment in his son's eyes. "I just want my boy back," David whispered. "I'm not your boy anymore," Tyler said, not unkindly but with absolute certainty. "I'm Maggie's boy now, and Mommy's boy, but I can still love you, if you promise not to leave me again." The confrontation that Maggie had been dreading, the dramatic showdown she had imagined, dissolved into something more profound and more heartbreaking. Tyler had found his voice, his strength, his ability to protect himself. And in doing so, he had given his father the most honest assessment of their relationship that David would ever receive. David looked at Diane and Maggie with something approaching acceptance. "He's happy here?" "Yes," Diane said simply. "He's safe." "Yes," Maggie confirmed. David stood slowly, his movements heavy with defeat and understanding. "I failed him. You made a terrible mistake," Maggie said gently. "But Tyler is okay. He's more than okay. And maybe that's what matters now." Tyler approached his father and held up the torn photograph. "Do you want this back, Daddy?" David looked at the image of their family before everything fell apart, then shook his head. "You keep it, to remember that we were happy once." Tyler nodded solemnly and tucked the photograph back into his pocket. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, he hugged his father. A brief, gentle embrace that spoke to forgiveness without requiring reconciliation. "I have to go now," David said to Tyler. "But maybe I can visit you sometimes? If your Mommy and Maggie say it's okay." Tyler looked at both women, who nodded carefully. "Okay," Tyler said. "But you have to promise not to take me away." "I promise," David said, and this time Maggie believed he meant it. After David left, the three of them sat together on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Tyler was nestled between Maggie and Diane, the torn photograph still in his pocket but no longer clutched like a lifeline. "Are you okay?" Diane asked her son. Tyler nodded. "I was scared when I saw Daddy, but then I remembered that I'm not alone anymore. I have you and Maggie, and this house and Grace watching over us." Maggie felt tears running down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude for this brave little boy who had taught her that healing was possible, that families could be chosen, and that sometimes the most profound love grew from the most unexpected circumstances. The legal battle would continue, but something fundamental had changed during David's visit. Tyler had found his voice, his strength, his ability to define his own needs and boundaries. And in that moment, Maggie knew that whatever came next, Tyler would be okay. Because he was no longer the frightened child walking alone on a dark highway. He was a boy who knew he was loved, who had learned that he deserved protection and stability, and who had discovered that sometimes angels came in the form of school bus drivers with broken hearts and empty houses that needed filling. The confrontation was over. The healing could continue. And tomorrow, Tyler would wake up in Grace's room, in the house that had become home to all of them, ready to draw new pictures of the family they had chosen to become. 6 months after the confrontation on the farmhouse porch, Tyler Preston walked into Lincoln Elementary School holding 2 lunch bags, one decorated with dinosaurs that Diane had packed, and another with a thermos of soup that Maggie had insisted he take in case the cafeteria food isn't good enough. The hearing that had once threatened to tear their family apart had become a formality. Judge Henley, presented with Dr. Wells' comprehensive report, Tyler's own testimony, and David's voluntary relinquishment of primary custody rights, had granted Diane and Maggie legal joint guardianship. David retained supervised visitation rights, which he exercised every other Saturday afternoon under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. Those visits were stilted affairs, more obligation than joy, but Tyler approached them with the same matter-of-fact acceptance he brought to most of his life now. David was his father, but he was no longer Tyler's world. That world had expanded to include Maggie's steady presence, Diane's fierce love, and the security of a home where the adults didn't disappear when life became difficult. Tyler Preston? Miss Jennifer Walsh called during morning attendance, and Tyler raised his hand confidently. 6 months ago, he had been a frightened boy who flinched at unexpected sounds. Now he was simply another second grader starting a new school year, remarkable only for his exceptional artwork and his habit of drawing buses with wings in the margins of his worksheets. At lunch, Tyler sat with a group of children who had quickly accepted him into their circle. He was funny, kind, and had an endless supply of stories about the chickens he helped care for at home. When asked about his family, Tyler would explain matter-of-factly that he lived with his mom and his Maggie, and that his dad visited sometimes but didn't live with them anymore. "Is Maggie your grandma?" asked Isabella, a girl with pigtails who sat next to him in reading circle. "No," Tyler said, considering the question seriously while unwrapping the sandwich Diane had made. "She's my Maggie. She found me when I was lost, and now she takes care of me." The explanation satisfied Isabella completely, as children were often more accepting of unconventional arrangements than adults. Family, to Tyler's classmates, was simply the people who loved you and made sure you had lunch money and helped with homework. Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, Maggie was experiencing her own new beginning. She had returned to her regular school bus route in September, but her relationship with the job had transformed completely. Where once she had driven her route mechanically, counting down the days until retirement, now she saw each child as someone's treasure, someone's Tyler. She learned their names, remembered their birthdays, and kept a box of tissues and Band-Aids in her first aid kit for scraped knees and hurt feelings. Bus driver Maggie is the best, 7-year-old Emma, a name that no longer brought pain but rather a gentle recognition of continuity, told her mother one afternoon. "She always makes sure we're safe, and she knows everyone's favorite songs." The farmhouse itself had undergone a transformation that went beyond Tyler's presence. Diane had brought her own touches to the space. Colorful throw pillows, plants that thrived under her attention, and a general sense of life being actively lived rather than simply endured. The kitchen table that had once held only Maggie's solitary meals now hosted homework sessions, art projects, and long conversations about everything from Tyler's day at school to Diane's new job at the county library. Diane had discovered a talent for organizing children's programs, and her story times had become legendary among local families. She would often practice her animated readings on Tyler and Maggie, filling the farmhouse with different voices and dramatic gestures that made Tyler giggle and applaud. "You're really good at that," Maggie told her one evening after a particularly energetic rendition of a story about dragons. "You should consider getting your degree in library science." "I've been thinking about it," Diane admitted. "The community college has a program. It would take a few years, but what? But it would mean more changes for Tyler, more uncertainty." Maggie looked across the living room where Tyler was sprawled on the floor, drawing what appeared to be a dragon wearing a school bus driver's hat. Tyler's not afraid of changes anymore. He knows he's safe here. And besides, dreams are important. Children need to see the adults in their lives pursuing their dreams. The conversation represented a shift in their relationship that had been building for months. In the beginning, their arrangement had been born of necessity. Tyler's need for stability, Maggie's need for purpose, Diane's need for support. But it had evolved into something none of them had anticipated. A genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and the kind of deep friendship that could only develop between people who had weathered a crisis together. Dr. Wells, in her final report, had noted that Tyler's recovery was among the most complete she had witnessed in her 15 years of practice. But what impressed her most was the way the adults in his life had also healed through the process of caring for him. Trauma recovery in children is often dependent on the stability and emotional health of their caregivers, she had written. In Tyler's case, the healing was mutual. Margaret O'Brien found purpose and family connection after years of isolation, while Diane Preston developed confidence and parenting skills through shared responsibility. The result is a family structure that, while unconventional, provides Tyler with multiple sources of love, support, and stability. The supervised visits with David continued, though they remained difficult for everyone involved. David was sober, compliant with all court requirements, and genuinely remorseful for his actions. But the relationship between father and son had been fundamentally altered by the events of that November night. Tyler was polite but distant during their visits, treating David more like a family friend than a parent. "He doesn't hate me," David told his therapist after one particularly stilted afternoon at the community center. "But he doesn't need me anymore either. Is that necessarily a bad thing?" the therapist asked. David considered the question. 6 months ago, I would have said yes. I thought being needed was the same as being loved. But Tyler is happy. He's healthy. He has people who love him and protect him. Maybe that's enough. It was a painful recognition, but also a necessary one. David's journey toward accepting his reduced role in Tyler's life was its own form of healing, a process of learning to love someone enough to want what was best for them, even when that didn't include you. One evening in late October, almost a year after that first encounter on Route 47, Tyler made an announcement that surprised both women. "I want to invite Daddy to my birthday party," he said over dinner. Maggie and Diane exchanged glances. Tyler's 8th birthday was still a month away, but they had been planning a small celebration with his new friends from school. "Are you sure?" Diane asked carefully. Tyler nodded seriously. "He's still my daddy, even if he doesn't live with us. And birthdays are for family." The party itself was a modest affair. 8 children running around the farmhouse yard, a chocolate cake that Tyler had helped Maggie bake, and presents that were appreciated more for the thought behind them than their monetary value. David arrived precisely on time, bearing a carefully chosen gift and wearing the nervous expression of someone who wasn't sure he belonged. But Tyler greeted his father with genuine warmth, introducing him to his friends as "my dad who lives somewhere else," and including him in the festivities with the easy acceptance that had become Tyler's hallmark. Watching David help Tyler blow out his candles, Maggie realized that healing sometimes looked like this. Not the restoration of what was broken, but the creation of something entirely new. Later, after the guests had gone home and David had returned to his supervised transportation, Tyler sat on the front porch with Maggie and Diane, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and pink. "This was the best birthday ever," Tyler announced, and both women felt the truth of it settle around them like a comfortable blanket. "Better than the year you got the remote control car?" Diane teased. "Better than that. Better than everything." Tyler leaned against Maggie's shoulder with the easy affection that had developed between them. "Because this time, everyone I love was here." Maggie thought about Grace, who would have been 12 now, who might have been sitting on the same porch complaining about homework or boys or the unfairness of bedtimes. The pain of that loss would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her. Grace's memory lived on in the art supplies Tyler used, in the room he slept in the knowledge that love could multiply rather than diminish when shared. "I love you too, sweetheart," Maggie said, wrapping her arms around Tyler and feeling Diane's hand squeeze her shoulder. They were an unusual family, bound together not by blood but by choice, crisis, and the gradual recognition that sometimes the most profound connections developed in the most unexpected ways. Tyler would grow up knowing that families could be created as well as born, that love could triumph over trauma, and that sometimes angels came disguised as school bus drivers with broken hearts and empty houses that desperately needed filling. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Tyler pointed upward and said, "Grace is watching. I can feel her." And Maggie, who had spent 5 years believing that death was an ending, finally understood that some stories continued in ways that the original storytellers never could have imagined. Grace lived on in Tyler's laughter, in Maggie's renewed purpose, in the knowledge that love was not a finite resource but an expanding universe of possibility. The night highway that had brought them together was far behind them now, but its lessons remained. That people could find each other in the darkest moments, that broken things could be mended in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the most beautiful families were the ones that chose each other against all odds. Tyler fell asleep that night surrounded by birthday cards and the comfortable sounds of two women who loved him planning his lunch for the next day, discussing weekend chores, and laughing quietly about something silly he had said during the party. It was the sound of ordinary family life, and it was more precious than any of them had ever imagined possible. In the morning, Tyler would wake up in Grace's room, in the house that had become home to all of them, ready to begin another day of the life they had built together. And Maggie would drive her school bus route with renewed purpose, knowing that every child who climbed those steps was someone's treasure, someone's hope, someone's reason for believing in tomorrow. The healing was complete. The new beginning had become simply beginning, and that was exactly as it should be. 1 year and 2 months after Margaret O'Brien first saw a small figure walking alone on Route 47, she sat behind the wheel of Bus 47 on the first day of the new school year, waiting for her most important passenger. The morning sun cast long shadows across the familiar farmland of Millbrook County, but everything about this moment felt different from that dark November night that had changed all their lives. Instead of an empty bus heading toward an empty house, Maggie's bus was filled with chattering children excited about the start of 3rd grade, and her house, their house, buzzed with the comfortable chaos of a family getting ready for the day. Tyler appeared at the bus door at exactly 7:42 a.m., his new backpack bouncing against his shoulders and his lunchbox decorated with his latest artistic creation. A family portrait showing 3 figures standing in front of a white farmhouse, with a ghostly figure of a girl with wings watching over them from a cloud above. "Good morning, bus driver Maggie," Tyler announced officially as he climbed the steps, though the formal greeting dissolved into giggles as soon as he reached the top. "Good morning, Mr. Preston," Maggie replied with equal formality, though her eyes sparkled with the warmth that had become her signature among the children on her route. "Did you remember your permission slip for the field trip?" Tyler patted his backpack confidently. "Mommy signed it, and you double-checked it, and I put it in the front pocket just like you taught me." As Tyler found his favorite seat, 3rd row back, right side, where he could see Maggie in the rearview mirror, other children greeted him with the easy familiarity of established friendship. Tyler had become something of a celebrity among his classmates, not because of his unusual family situation, but because of his remarkable artistic talent and his endless stories about life on the farmhouse. "Tyler, did you bring your sketchbook?" asked Tommy Martinez, Detective Rosa Martinez's nephew, who had become Tyler's best friend over the summer. "Always," Tyler replied, pulling out a well-worn notebook filled with drawings that had evolved far beyond his early trauma-processing artwork. Now his sketches captured the ordinary magic of his daily life. Diane reading stories at the library, Maggie teaching him to drive the tractor, the chickens in increasingly ridiculous situations, and always, buses with wings. As they drove toward Lincoln Elementary, Maggie caught Tyler's eye in the rearview mirror. In that brief glance, she saw not the frightened, abandoned boy she had found on the highway, but a confident 8-year-old who knew exactly who he was and where he belonged. "Maggie," Tyler said, using the name he reserved for their most serious conversations, "I want to tell you something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I'm not scared of buses anymore, or highways, or being alone in the dark." Tyler's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone he used when stating important truths. Because I know that even if I got lost again, you would find me. The simple statement nearly brought tears to Maggie's eyes, but she managed to keep her voice steady. You're never going to be lost again, Tyler. You're home now. I know, Tyler said contentedly, returning his attention to a drawing of a school bus decorated with Christmas lights. But it's nice to know anyway. At the school, Tyler joined the stream of children heading toward the brick building, where he had spent the previous year discovering that he was smart, funny, and capable of making friends easily. His teacher, Miss Rodriguez, greeted him with the special smile reserved for students who brought joy into the classroom simply by being themselves. Tyler, I see you have your art supplies. Are you ready to show the new students your bus drawings? Tyler nodded eagerly. Over the summer, his artwork had become part of Lincoln Elementary's informal curriculum for helping children process difficult emotions. Other students going through family transitions or trauma were often introduced to Tyler's story. Not the details of his abandonment, but the message that families could be created, that healing was possible, and that sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the most difficult circumstances. As Maggie drove away from the school, she reflected on the strange mathematics of her life. She had lost Grace, and that loss had nearly destroyed her. But finding Tyler or being found by him had taught her that love wasn't a finite resource to be hoarded against future loss. Love multiplied when shared, expanded when given freely, and could transform the most broken hearts into something stronger than they had ever been before. Her route that morning took her past the spot on Route 47 where everything had changed. She had driven this stretch of highway hundreds of times since that November night, but today she pulled over at the exact location where she had first seen Tyler walking in her headlights. The shoulder looked different in daylight, just another patch of asphalt beside a rural road, unremarkable except for the small memorial marker that Tyler had asked to place there 6 months earlier. It wasn't a monument to trauma, but rather a celebration of connection. The hand-painted sign read simply, "Where angels find each other," and was decorated with Tyler's distinctive drawing of a bus with golden wings. Maggie sat in the silence of her empty bus and thought about the ripple effects of that single moment of choosing to stop. Tyler's life had been saved, obviously, but the healing had extended far beyond one rescued child. Diane had found her confidence and was now halfway through her library science program, inspired by Tyler's example to pursue her dreams fearlessly. David had maintained his sobriety for over a year and was slowly, carefully rebuilding a relationship with his son based on respect rather than possession. Even Detective Martinez had been affected, implementing new protocols for responding to child abandonment cases that prioritized immediate trauma support. But perhaps most remarkably, the story had become part of the community's folklore. Not the sensational details of abandonment and rescue, but the quieter message about the possibility of healing, the power of chosen family, and the truth that sometimes the most profound gifts came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. At the farmhouse that evening, Tyler sat at the kitchen table working on his homework while Diane prepared dinner and Maggie graded the bus route schedules for the following week. The scene was utterly ordinary, a family navigating the routine challenges of weeknight life, and absolutely extraordinary in its peaceful contentment. "Tyler," Diane said, stirring a pot of soup that filled the kitchen with warmth and the promise of comfort. "Don't forget that Saturday is your visit with your father." Tyler looked up from his math worksheet without any of the anxiety that such announcements had once triggered. "I know. He said he wants to take me to the art museum in the city. He's been learning about artists so we can talk about my drawings." David's transformation had been the slowest and most difficult of all, but it had been genuine. He attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings religiously, worked with a therapist who specialized in helping parents rebuild relationships after addiction, and had gradually earned back small portions of Tyler's trust through consistent, reliable behavior. The visits were no longer supervised by court officials, though they remained structured and time-limited. David had accepted that he would never again be Tyler's primary parent, but he was learning to find meaning in his role as a supportive presence in his son's life. "What kind of art do you want to see?" Maggie asked, genuinely curious about Tyler's interests. "The sculptures," Tyler replied without hesitation. I want to see how they make stone look like it's moving. And I want to ask Daddy if he thinks Grace would have liked art museums. The casual way Tyler included Grace in his thoughts and plans had become one of the most healing aspects of their unusual family. He spoke of her not as a sad memory or a source of Maggie's pain, but as a continuing presence who influenced their daily life in positive ways. I think Grace would have loved art museums, Maggie said. She always saw beauty in unexpected places. Like you saw beauty in me when I was walking on the scary road, Tyler observed with the clarity that children sometimes possessed. Exactly like that. Later that evening, after Tyler had completed his homework and taken his bath, and listened to Diane read 3 chapters from his current favorite book, he appeared in the doorway of the living room where Maggie was reading. "Can I show you something?" he asked, holding a large piece of paper behind his back. Of course. Tyler revealed his latest masterpiece, a detailed drawing that had clearly taken weeks to complete. It showed the farmhouse in full color, with every window glowing warmly and tiny figures visible inside going about their daily activities. But what made the drawing extraordinary was the sky above the house, where Tyler had drawn dozens of figures with wings. Not angels in the traditional sense, but ordinary people who had learned to fly. "This is our family," Tyler explained, pointing to the figures in the house. "And these are all the people who watch over families like ours. Grace is here, and Tommy's grandfather who died last year, and Isabella's grandmother, and all the people who love us even though we can't see them." Maggie studied the drawing with wonder. "Tyler, this is incredible. You've become such an amazing artist." "I want to be an artist when I grow up," Tyler announced. "And I want to teach other kids who are scared that they can draw their feelings until they're not scared anymore." The simple statement encapsulated everything their journey had been about: the transformation of trauma into purpose, the evolution of pain into the tools for healing others, the recognition that the most profound gifts often came disguised as the most difficult challenges. "I think that's a wonderful dream," Maggie said, hanging the drawing on the refrigerator alongside his other masterpieces and Grace's preserved artwork. "And I think you're going to help a lot of children." That night, as Tyler slept peacefully in Grace's room, surrounded by the comfortable sounds of 2 women who loved him discussing plans for the weekend, Maggie lay awake thinking about the circular nature of healing. She had been driving an empty bus toward an empty house when she found Tyler, convinced that her story was essentially over. Now, a year later, she was driving a bus filled with children toward a house filled with laughter, purpose, and the daily miracles of family life. Tyler had been walking alone on a dark highway, abandoned and terrified, clutching a torn photograph of a family that no longer existed. Now he slept securely in a warm bed, surrounded by people who chose to love him, creating art that helped other children process their own difficult emotions. Diane had been a struggling single mother, overwhelmed by guilt and the impossible demands of protecting her son while building a new life. Now she was a confident co-parent pursuing her education while helping other families at the library, secure in the knowledge that Tyler was thriving. Even David, who had made the most destructive choices, had found a path toward redemption through accepting responsibility, maintaining sobriety, and learning to love his son enough to want what was best for him, even when that didn't include him. The highway that had brought them together was still there, still dark and dangerous for anyone traveling it alone. But for this family, it had become a symbol not of abandonment but of connection, not of trauma but of transformation, not of ending but of beginning. As the seasons turned and Tyler grew taller and his artwork grew more sophisticated and their family routine became as natural as breathing, the story of the night highway became less about the darkness they had escaped and more about the light they had created together. Tyler would grow up knowing that families could be chosen, that love was not a finite resource, that healing was always possible, and that sometimes angels came disguised as school bus drivers with broken hearts and empty houses that desperately needed filling. And on quiet evenings when the 3 of them sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and pink, Tyler would sometimes point to the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and say, "Grace is watching, and she's proud of our family." And Maggie, who had spent 5 years believing that love died with the person you loved, would understand that some stories continued in ways that the original storytellers never could have imagined, that some connections transcended death, and that the most beautiful families were often the ones that chose each other against all odds and discovered that broken people could help heal each other in the most unexpected and wonderful ways. The school bus with wings that Tyler drew had become more than a symbol. It had become a reality, carrying not just children to school but hope to families, healing to broken hearts, and the promise that even in the darkest moments, someone would always be watching for the small figures walking alone, ready to stop, ready to help, ready to discover that rescue was often mutual and that the most profound love stories were about people who saved each other. The circle was complete. The healing was whole. And tomorrow, Tyler would wake up in Grace's room, in the house that had become home to all of them, ready to begin another day of the extraordinary ordinary life they had built together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one small act of love at a time. The night highway had brought them together, but the life they built in the light was entirely their own creation. A testament to the truth that broken things could be mended, that families could be chosen, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings were actually new beginnings in disguise.